Aladdin and the Magical Lamp. In the bustling and prosperous city of China, there lived a humble tailor named Mustafa. Despite living in a city brimming with wealth and opportunities, Mustafa was very poor. His days were spent toiling in his small shop, stitching and mending clothes for his modest clientele. His income was meager, barely enough to sustain himself and his small family, which consisted of his wife and their only son, Aladdin. Aladdin, unlike his hard-working father, was a careless and idle boy. From a young age, he showed little interest in helping his father or learning the trade of tailoring. Instead, he preferred to spend his days roaming the streets and playing with other idle children. He would leave home early in the morning and return only when the sun had set, much to the dismay of his parents. Mustafa, seeing his son growing up without any sense of responsibility or discipline, decided that it was time for Aladdin to learn a trade. He took Aladdin into his shop and began to teach him the basics of tailoring. Mustafa showed him how to use a needle and thread, how to measure fabric, and how to make neat stitches. However, Aladdin had no interest in learning. As soon as his father's back was turned, he would slip out of the shop and disappear into the streets, joining his friends in their aimless games. Mustafa tried everything to make Aladdin stay and learn the trade. He scolded him, punished him, and even tried to bribe him with small treats, but nothing worked. Aladdin's mother, too, tried to persuade him to help his father, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Aladdin was incorrigible. He was more interested in having fun than in working. Mustafa's efforts to discipline his son and turn him into a responsible young man were in vain. The stress and disappointment took a toll on Mustafa's health. He became sick and, after a few months, passed away, leaving his wife and son behind. With his father gone, Aladdin felt no restraint and gave himself entirely to his idle habits. He spent his days wandering the streets, playing games, and associating with other idle boys. He never gave a thought to his future or to how he would support himself and his mother. His mother, though heartbroken over her husband's death and worried about Aladdin's future, did what she could to support them. She spun cotton and did other small tasks to earn a little money. Aladdin's life continued in this manner until one day, when he was 15 years old, something extraordinary happened. He was playing with his friends in the street when a stranger approached them. This man was no ordinary passerby. He was an African magician who had recently arrived in the city. The magician had spent years traveling through Africa and Asia, gathering magical knowledge and artifacts. He had come to China in search of a particular treasure, and he believed that Aladdin could help him find it. The magician observed Aladdin closely. There was something about the boy that caught his attention. Perhaps it was his carefree demeanor or his lack of purpose, but the magician saw potential in Aladdin. He asked the other boys about Aladdin, inquiring about his name, his family, and his habits. Once he had learned all he needed to know, he approached Aladdin and took him aside. "Child," the magician said, "was not your father called Mustafa the tailor?" "Yes, sir," replied Aladdin, a little surprised that this stranger knew his father's name. "But he has been dead for a long time." At these words, the magician threw his arms around Aladdin's neck and kissed him several times, with tears in his eyes. "I am your uncle," he said. "Your worthy father was my brother. I knew you at first sight. You are so like him." Aladdin was bewildered. He had never heard of any uncle. But the magician seemed so sincere and affectionate that Aladdin couldn't help but believe him. The magician then gave Aladdin a handful of small coins. "Go, my son," he said. "Take this money to your mother and tell her that I will visit her tomorrow. I wish to see where my good brother lived and where he ended his days. Aladdin, thrilled by the unexpected generosity, ran home to his mother. "Mother," he cried, "do I have an uncle?" "No, child," replied his mother, puzzled by the question. "You have no uncle on your father's side or mine. But I have just met a man who says he is my uncle, my father's brother," Aladdin explained. "He cried and kissed me when I told him that my father was dead. He gave me money and sent his love to you. He promised to visit us tomorrow to see the house where my father lived and died." Aladdin's mother was astonished. "Indeed, child, your father had no brother. This must be some trickster trying to deceive us." The next day, true to his word, the magician returned. He found Aladdin playing in another part of the town and embraced him as before. He gave Aladdin 2 pieces of gold and said, "Carry this, child, to your mother. Tell her that I will come to see her tonight. Ask her to prepare something for supper. But first, show me the house where you live." Aladdin showed the magician the way to his house. Aladdin ran to his house to give the gold coins to his mother. His mother, still skeptical, took the money and went out to buy provisions. She also borrowed various utensils from her neighbors, as she didn't have enough of her own. She spent the whole day preparing the supper. That evening, just as Aladdin was about to go out and look for the magician, there was a knock at the door. The magician entered, carrying wine and all sorts of fruits for dessert. He greeted Aladdin's mother warmly and asked to see the place where his brother Mustafa used to sit. Aladdin's mother showed him the spot, and the magician fell down, kissed it several times, and cried out with tears in his eyes, "My poor brother! How unhappy am I not to have come soon enough to give you one last embrace." Aladdin's mother, touched by his display of emotion, invited him to sit in the same place. But the magician declined. "No," he said, "I shall not do that. But allow me to sit opposite it, so that although I cannot see my dear brother, I can at least look at the place where he used to sit." Once the magician had chosen a seat, he began to converse with Aladdin's mother. "My good sister," he said, "do not be surprised that you have never seen me during all the years you were married to my brother. I have been away from this country for 40 years. I traveled to the Indies, Persia, Arabia, and Syria, and then settled in Egypt. I long to see my native country again and to embrace my dear brother. But when I arrived, I found that he had died. It is a comfort to me to find a part of him in his son, who looked so much like him." Aladdin's mother, moved by the magician's words and his resemblance to her late husband, began to weep. The magician, seeing her tears, changed the subject and turned to Aladdin. "What trade do you follow, my nephew?" he asked. "Are you learning your father's trade?" At this question, Aladdin hung his head in shame. His mother answered for him. "Aladdin is an idle boy," she said. "His father tried to teach him the trade, but he could not succeed. Since his father's death, despite all I can say to him, he does nothing but idle away his time in the streets. If you do not make him ashamed of his behavior, I despair of him ever coming to any good. I have even thought of turning him out of the house to make him provide for himself." After these words, Aladdin's mother burst into tears again. The magician turned to Aladdin and said, "This is not well, nephew. You must think of helping yourself and earning your livelihood. There are many trades you could learn. Perhaps you do not like your father's trade and would prefer another. I will help you. If you do not want to learn a handicraft, I will set you up in a shop with all sorts of fine goods to sell. Tell me what you think of my proposal, and you will always find me ready to keep my word." Aladdin, who hated work, was delighted with this plan. He told the magician that he would be grateful for his kindness, and that he preferred selling goods to learning a trade. "Very well," said the magician. "I will take you with me tomorrow, dress you as handsomely as the best merchants in the city, and then we will open a shop for you." Aladdin's mother, reassured by the magician's promise of kindness to her son, no longer doubted that he was her husband's brother. She thanked him for his good intentions and, after urging Aladdin to prove himself worthy of his uncle's favor, served supper. They talked of various matters, and then the magician took his leave. The next day, the magician returned and took Aladdin to a merchant who sold clothes. He told Aladdin to choose the finest clothes he liked, and he paid for them. Aladdin, now handsomely dressed, thanked his uncle, who said, "As you are soon to be a merchant, it is proper that you get to know the shops and the people who run them." The magician then showed Aladdin the largest and finest mosques, the inns where merchants and travelers lodged, and even the Sultan's palace. Finally, they went to the magician's lodging, where he introduced Aladdin to some merchants he had met since arriving in the city. The magician gave a lavish treat to the merchants to help Aladdin get acquainted with them. The entertainment lasted until nightfall. When Aladdin was about to leave, the magician insisted on accompanying him home. When they arrived, Aladdin's mother was overjoyed to see her son so well dressed. She thanked the magician and blessed him for his kindness. The next morning, the magician called for Aladdin again. He told him they would spend the day in the countryside and that he would purchase the shop the next day. They left the city and walked to some magnificent palaces, each with beautiful gardens open to the public. At every palace, the magician asked Aladdin if he thought it was fine. Aladdin, eager to please his uncle, agreed that each palace was finer than the last. By this means, the magician led Aladdin far into the countryside. Pretending to be tired, he suggested they rest in one of the gardens by a fountain. They sat down, and the magician pulled out a handkerchief with cakes and fruit. As they ate, the magician advised Aladdin to leave his bad company and seek the company of wise and prudent men to improve himself. When they had eaten their fill, they resumed their walk. They crossed several gardens separated only by small ditches. The inhabitants trusted each other so much that no walls or fences were needed. Eventually, the magician led Aladdin to a narrow valley between two moderate-sized mountains. "We will go no farther now," said the magician. "I will show you some extraordinary things here. Gather all the dry sticks you can find to kindle a fire." Aladdin collected a large heap of dried sticks, and the magician set them on fire. When they were blazing, he threw some incense into the flames and pronounced several magical words. The ground shook, and a stone with a brass ring fixed in it appeared. This adaptation is based on the story of Aladdin by Arabian Nights. If you enjoyed this part of the story, please consider subscribing to the channel for more updates and remaining parts of this story.